Lyra stood at the edge of the observation deck, her eyes scanning the star-filled sky. She wasn't the kind to get easily lost in thoughts, especially not about humans. Her people, the Cinder, had lived among the stars for millennia, developing technology and knowledge beyond anything most species could imagine. Yet, for all their advancements, the Cinder had always regarded humans as unpredictable. Their reckless energy, their untamed spirit, it was something that made them difficult to trust. Lyra, in particular, had always been wary. As a high-ranking officer of the Cinder fleet, she had seen humans at their best and their worst. Some had proven to be brave allies, while others had shown a terrifying disregard for the consequences of their actions. They were young, passionate, and driven by an instinct to survive at all costs. But now, standing on the deck of the grand vessel Phoenix, Lyra found herself staring at a situation she never expected. The Earth ship was docking, bringing with it the first batch of human soldiers that would join the Cinder military alliance. Lyra's chest tightened at the thought of interacting with them. She had been assigned as a liaison to ensure that the human soldiers integrated smoothly into the Cinder forces. It was a duty she had been reluctantly given, one she wasn't thrilled about. Among the crew, humans were seen as a necessary but unpredictable addition. They were strong and resourceful, but their lack of discipline was concerning. Lyra's mind wandered as she considered the soldiers she was about to meet. Would they be any different from the ones she had met during the treaty negotiations, or would they prove to be just as chaotic and difficult to manage? As the ship's docking sequence began, Lyra's thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps behind her. She turned to see Captain Kale approaching. The Cinder captain was tall, with an imposing presence, but even he seemed slightly less confident as the moment drew near. "The humans are arriving," Kale said, his voice steady, but his eyes betraying a flicker of uncertainty. "Are you prepared to meet them, Lyra?" She took a deep breath. "I am, but I don't expect them to be easy to handle. There are things about their nature that still baffle me." Kale gave a quiet nod, understanding. "It's not just their nature. It's the way they've survived for so long. They're different from us, but they can be valuable allies, and some of them have something that we don't." "What do you mean?" Lyra asked, genuinely curious. Cal's gaze shifted toward the docking bay, where the first human soldiers were now emerging. "They have a strength of will, a determination that doesn't fade. It can be dangerous, yes, but it's also something that can't be ignored." Lyra raised an eyebrow. "You're beginning to sound like one of them, Kale." Kale smiled slightly. "Maybe, but I've seen what they can do. And sometimes, that kind of raw strength is exactly what we need." Lyra didn't respond right away, her thoughts swirling. She had read the reports, studied human history. Their wars, their conflicts, it was all so chaotic. Yet there was something undeniable about their persistence. Still, she wasn't sure if that persistence was a strength or a weakness. Only time would tell. As the first human soldiers stepped onto the docking platform, Lyra's gaze locked onto one in particular. He was tall, his features sharp, and his posture confident. His uniform, a mix of sleek, modern combat gear and the distinctly human insignia of the Earth forces, was a far cry from the Cinder's more elegant and functional attire. His eyes met hers for a brief moment, and for some strange reason, Lyra felt a jolt in her chest. It wasn't just his physical presence, it was the intensity in his gaze, the unspoken understanding that passed between them. Lyra quickly turned away, pushing the feeling aside. She had no time for distractions, especially not one like him. "Captain Lyra," the soldier said, his voice calm and steady. "I'm Sergeant Jacob Carter. It's an honor to be assigned here." Lyra nodded curtly. "Welcome, Sergeant Carter. I hope you'll be ready to learn how to work alongside the Cinder." She couldn't quite mask the coldness in her tone, but Carter didn't flinch. His eyes never left hers, as though he could sense the walls she was trying to build around herself. As they walked toward the training area, Lyra kept her distance. The soldier's presence still unsettled her, but she couldn't pinpoint why. She had met many humans before, but something about him felt different. Whether it was his confidence, his unwavering determination, or something else entirely, Lyra couldn't deny that he had caught her attention. The future, as always, was uncertain, and in this moment, it seemed that the path ahead would be more complicated than she could have imagined. The days that followed were filled with a flurry of activity. Sergeant Jacob Carter and the rest of the human soldiers were integrated into the Cinder training facilities, where they were expected to learn Cinder tactics and technology. Lyra oversaw the process, making sure everything went smoothly. But even as the soldiers trained, her mind kept returning to Carter. There was something about him, something that stood out among the others. She couldn't quite place it, but it was undeniable. Jacob was different. Lyra observed him during training sessions, watching as he pushed himself and his comrades harder than anyone else. His focus was sharp, his body strong and agile. But it wasn't just his physical strength that caught her attention. It was his determination. The other human soldiers followed instructions well enough, but Jacob seemed to take it a step further, often challenging the Cinder instructors with his unconventional methods. One morning, as the soldiers were practicing hand-to-hand combat, Lyra stood at the edge of the sparring arena, her arms crossed, watching the action closely. The Cinder instructors were tough, their martial skills nearly unmatched. But even they seemed surprised when Jacob faced off against one of the senior Cinder soldiers, a veteran named Thal. Thal was known for his speed and precision. In a fight, he was almost untouchable, but Jacob wasn't intimidated. The two squared off, and Lyra's attention sharpened. The air seemed to crackle with the energy of the match as the two combatants circled each other. The clash came suddenly. Thal moved with lightning speed, aiming a strike at Jacob's chest. But Jacob was ready. In a split second, he dodged, stepping to the side and landing a counterblow to Thal's ribs. The crowd gasped in surprise. It wasn't a perfect strike, but it was enough to make Thal pause. Thal narrowed his eyes, clearly impressed. But he wasn't about to go easy on the human. He launched another series of attacks, each one more deadly than the last. Jacob was fast, but Thal was faster. The Cinder soldier's movements were fluid, like a predator toying with its prey. But Jacob didn't give up. His eyes never left Thal's, his focus unwavering. Lyra watched, captivated by his determination. This wasn't just a fight. This was a test of willpower. Jacob wasn't fighting just for victory. He was fighting to prove something deep inside of him that refused to accept defeat. For several more minutes, the battle raged. Jacob's movements were getting slower, his breathing heavier. He was clearly struggling to keep up with Thal's relentless assault. But just as it seemed like the fight was about to end in Thal's favor, Jacob found an opening. He lunged forward, grabbing Thal's wrist and twisting it sharply, using his opponent's momentum against him. Thal staggered, momentarily thrown off balance. In that moment of vulnerability, Jacob locked him in a hold, pinning him to the ground with surprising strength. The crowd went silent. Thal, caught in the unexpected move, looked up at Jacob with a mixture of respect and astonishment. He hadn't expected the human to be able to turn the tide like that. Jacob stood up, breathing heavily, and extended a hand to help Thal up. "Good match," he said, his voice steady despite his exhaustion. Thal took the hand, pulling himself to his feet. "You're a lot stronger than I thought," he admitted with a grin. "I didn't expect you to hold your own against me." Jacob shrugged, wiping sweat from his brow. "Just doing my best." Lyra couldn't help but feel a flicker of admiration. There was something about Jacob's resilience that she hadn't seen before in any of the humans she had worked with. He wasn't just trying to survive. He was trying to thrive, even in the face of impossible odds. Later that day, Lyra found herself walking through the hallways of the ship, her mind preoccupied with the events of the sparring match. She passed by the training area where Jacob was wiping down his gear. He looked up as she approached, his eyes meeting hers with that same steady gaze that seemed to hold something more than just the typical human confidence. "Captain Lyra," he said, offering her a respectful nod. "I hope I didn't make things difficult today." She shook her head, surprising herself with the honesty in her voice. "No, you made things interesting. You're not like the others." Jacob smirked, clearly pleased with the compliment. "I've always believed that the impossible is just something waiting to be done." Lyra raised an eyebrow, a slight smile playing at the corner of her lips. "You certainly don't lack for confidence." "I guess I'm just doing what I have to do," Jacob replied with a shrug. Lyra couldn't help but feel a pull of curiosity. There was more to this soldier than she had initially realized. She'd always prided herself on understanding others. But Jacob was different. He was more than just a soldier. He was someone who lived with purpose, someone who would do whatever it took to succeed. As she turned to leave, Lyra couldn't shake the feeling that her interactions with Jacob were only just beginning. And for the first time in a long time, she found herself wondering what that would mean for both of them. The weeks that followed were intense. Training sessions were grueling, but Jacob and his fellow soldiers adapted quickly to the Cinder way of combat. Lyra observed the humans closely, still fascinated by their ability to push past physical limits. But her attention always returned to Jacob. There was something about his dedication, something that stood out even among the other soldiers. He didn't just follow orders. He embraced them, and that made him a leader in his own right. One evening, as the ship docked at a Cinder outpost, Lyra received an unexpected message. It was a mission briefing, a dangerous mission, one that required both human and Cinder forces to work together. The message was clear. The Cinder were under threat from an unknown enemy. A powerful, hostile force had entered their sector, and they needed all available hands to help defend their territory. Lyra immediately called for a meeting with the human soldiers. Jacob and his team entered the briefing room, their faces a mix of curiosity and seriousness. Lyra stood at the front, her eyes scanning the group. "This mission is crucial," she began, her voice firm and steady. "We don't know much about the enemy, but we know they're dangerous. They've already wiped out a few of our outposts. We can't let them reach our homeworld." Jacob stepped forward, his usual calm demeanor now replaced with a sharp focus. "What's the plan, Captain?" Lyra's gaze met his, and she could see the determination in his eyes. He was ready. The others stood behind him, waiting for her next words. "We'll split into 2 teams. One team will hold the line here, while the other goes to investigate their main base. I'll lead the team on the defensive, while Sergeant Carter, you'll lead the reconnaissance team." Jacob nodded, never looking away. "Understood." Lyra glanced at the team of human soldiers, noting the trust they already had in Jacob. It was rare for humans to earn such quick loyalty, but Jacob was different. His leadership was obvious, even to the Cinder soldiers. She'd seen it in their eyes during training. They respected him. The plan was set. Hours later, they were on their way to the enemy's territory, the Phoenix cutting through the stars at breakneck speed. Lyra's team remained on alert, preparing for whatever might come. As they approached the enemy's position, the atmosphere grew tense. The unknown always had a way of heightening fear, and this enemy was no exception. Their technology was unlike anything the Cinder had ever encountered. When they finally arrived, the enemy base loomed ahead, dark and imposing. Lyra's heart beat faster. She could sense the danger in the air, but she didn't let it show. Her role was to lead, and she would do it without hesitation. Behind her, her team readied their weapons, their faces set in grim determination. Jacob's team was already preparing for their part of the mission. The reconnaissance group would move swiftly, gathering information on the enemy's numbers and technology. They had to remain undetected at all costs. "I trust you, Sergeant," Lyra said quietly as Jacob prepared to leave with his team. Jacob met her gaze, his voice steady. "You'll get the support you need, Captain." Before she could respond, He turned and signaled for his team to follow. They moved quickly, blending into the shadows as they made their way to the enemy base. Lyra watched them go, her thoughts a mix of concern and admiration. She had seen how hard Jacob worked to earn the trust of his soldiers. Now he was taking them into the unknown, facing an enemy that could easily overwhelm them. The battle, as Lyra soon learned, was unlike any she had ever fought. The enemy's weapons were advanced, their tactics unpredictable. The Cinder and human forces were well coordinated, but every move they made was countered by the enemy's quick adjustments. As Lyra led her team into the fray, her thoughts kept drifting to Jacob and his team. She couldn't shake the worry that clung to her chest. What if something went wrong? What if they weren't prepared for what they would find? Hours passed, and the battle raged on. Lyra's team held the line, but the enemy kept pressing, their forces seemingly endless. The Sindar warriors fought fiercely, but the humans, they surprised her. Their tenacity, their willingness to fight when others would have fallen back. It was something Lyra had never expected. Suddenly, an urgent communication came through. It was Jacob. "Captain, we've found something. You need to see this." His voice crackled through the comm system, urgency clear in his tone. Lyra's heart skipped a beat. "What have you found, Sergeant?" "It's a weapon, a powerful one. They're planning to use it against us. We need to destroy it before they can activate it." Lyra's mind raced. The stakes had just become higher. "Understood. We'll rendezvous at your location." She turned to her team, her voice sharp and commanding. "Prepare to move. We have a new objective." As Lyra and her team moved toward Jacob's position, she couldn't shake the feeling that this mission would change everything. The enemy wasn't just another threat. They were something far more dangerous. And the Cinder and humans would have to fight with everything they had to survive. When they finally reached Jacob's location, Lyra saw him standing in front of a massive structure. The weapon was there, glowing with an ominous energy. "We destroy it now," Lyra said, her voice cold with resolve. Jacob nodded. Agreed. The final battle had just begun. The structure before them was unlike anything Lyra had seen before. It stood tall, dark, and imposing, its surface rippling with a strange alien energy. The weapon they had come to destroy pulsed beneath it, sending a faint hum through the air. Lyra felt a shiver run down her spine. This wasn't just a weapon. It was something far more dangerous. Whatever it was, it had the power to change the course of the war. Jacob stood beside her, his eyes locked on the structure, his expression tense. "We need to move quickly," he said. "If they activate this thing, we won't stand a chance." Lyra nodded. Agreed. "We'll disable the power source first. Once it's down, we can destroy the rest." The plan was simple. Infiltrate the structure, find the power core, and shut it down before the enemy could use it. But as they moved forward, the ground beneath them rumbled. The enemy was aware of their presence. "We've been spotted," Jacob said, his voice low but filled with urgency. "We need to go now." Lyra didn't hesitate. "Push forward. Stay close and watch each other's backs." Her team followed closely, their weapons raised and their movements calculated. Jacob's soldiers had become well accustomed to working with the Cinder. The trust between them was clear. Despite the chaos, there was a sense of unity that made Lyra feel, if only for a moment, that perhaps this alliance could truly work. The further they moved inside, the more the air seemed to thicken. The walls were lined with strange symbols, glowing faintly in the dim light. Lyra studied them for a moment, but there was no time for deciphering. They had a mission, and failure was not an option. As they reached a large chamber, the power core was revealed, a massive crystalline structure suspended in the air by a network of dark energy. It was surrounded by guards, humanoid figures with strange mechanical armor. Lyra's mind raced as she assessed the situation. They were outnumbered, but there was no turning back now. "Jacob, take your team to the left. We'll go right," Lyra commanded, her voice sharp. Without a word, Jacob nodded, leading his soldiers to flank the enemy on one side. Lyra signaled her own team to move swiftly. They would need to be quick and precise if they were to take down the guards before they triggered any alarms. The battle was immediate. Lyra and her team moved in fast, engaging the enemy with practiced precision. Her body moved instinctively, her training kicking in as she took down one guard after another. The sound of weapons fire echoed through the chamber, but Lyra remained focused, keeping her eyes on the power core. Meanwhile, Jacob and his soldiers were making progress on their side. Despite their initial inexperience with Cinder combat tactics, they fought with raw determination, each one of them moving with a purpose. Jacob, at the forefront of his group, was a whirlwind of motion, dodging, striking, and taking down the enemy with the kind of relentless energy that Lyra had come to expect from him. The battle was chaotic, but there was an order to it. Lyra's team fought with the grace and precision that came from years of training, while Jacob's soldiers used their speed and unpredictability to keep the enemy off balance. Together, they were a force to be reckoned with. But even with their combined strength, the enemy wasn't going down easily. They were well prepared, their armor tough, and their weapons deadly. Lyra could see the wariness starting to show in her team, but there was no time to rest. They had to finish the job. "We're almost there," Jacob called out, his voice filled with determination. "Just a little more." Lyra glanced at him, nodding in agreement. They had to push through. The power core was within reach now, its glow growing more intense by the second. If they didn't deactivate it soon, they'd be too late. As they reached the center of the room, Lyra saw the last of the guards fall. The chamber was silent, save for the low hum of the power core. Jacob and his team had successfully cleared their side. Lyra moved toward the crystal, her mind focused on the task at hand. She approached it cautiously, scanning for any potential traps or surprises. The energy field surrounding the core pulsed with a strange, almost hypnotic rhythm. Lyra took a deep breath and extended her hand toward it. "Captain, wait." Jacob's voice rang out. Lyra turned just in time to see one of the remaining guards lunge toward her. But before he could reach her, Jacob was there, tackling the soldier to the ground with a force that sent them both crashing into the nearby wall. "You're too slow," Jacob said, his voice a mix of amusement and intensity. "We need to finish this now." Lyra didn't need any further encouragement. She pressed a series of buttons on her wrist console, activating a sequence designed to shut down the power core. The energy field around it flickered for a moment, and then it collapsed into nothing. The room was silent, save for the steady hum of the remaining machinery. The weapon was disabled. "Good work, everyone," Lyra said, her voice filled with relief. "Let's get out of here before they regroup." Jacob gave her a quick nod, his eyes never leaving the now deactivated power core. "Mission accomplished. But we're not out of the woods yet." Lyra turned toward him, her expression unreadable. "You're right. We've still got a long way to go." As they made their way out of the structure, Lyra couldn't shake the feeling that their victory was only the beginning. The enemy was still out there, and they would stop at nothing to finish what they had started. But for now, they had won a small victory, and that was enough to keep them moving forward. The quiet after the battle was a rare thing. Lyra's team and Jacob's soldiers stood outside the deactivated weapons structure, catching their breath and scanning the area for any sign of enemy movement. Despite their victory, something in the air felt different. They had destroyed one threat, but it didn't seem like the war was anywhere near over. Jacob wiped his brow, glancing around. "I thought that would be the end of it, but something doesn't feel right." Lyra stood beside him, her sharp eyes scanning the dark horizon. "I feel it too. We've only seen a small part of what they're capable of. That weapon was just a piece of a much bigger puzzle." One of her soldiers, Varn, approached, his face serious. "Captain, the communications are back online. I've received reports from the other teams. We're not the only ones dealing with these attacks. They'd been hitting multiple outposts, and every one of them is much stronger than we anticipated. Lyra's heart sank. What kind of forces are we dealing with? Varn's eyes hardened. Unknown. But they have technology far beyond anything we've seen. It's like they're a part of something much larger, something we haven't encountered before. Jacob spoke up, his voice filled with resolve. If we don't act fast, they'll destroy everything we've worked for. We need to get ahead of them. Lyra met his gaze, and for a moment, they shared an unspoken understanding. Jacob was right. The stakes were higher than ever. It wasn't just a fight for survival anymore. It was a race to uncover the truth about their enemies before it was too late. Varn, keep monitoring the communications, Lyra commanded. Everyone else, prepare for the next step. We'll head back to the ship and plan our next move. As the team made their way back to the Phoenix, the atmosphere was tense. Each step they took felt heavy, as if the weight of the unknown was pressing down on them. Lyra couldn't help but feel the unease in her chest. They had won the battle, but the war had only just begun. Once aboard the ship, they gathered around the command table. Lyra activated the holographic map, displaying the locations of the enemy attacks. The more she studied the map, the more she realized how widespread the enemy had become. These weren't isolated incidents. They were coordinated strikes, and they were everywhere. This is bigger than we thought, Jacob said, his voice grim. They're spreading fast. Lyra nodded. We need to hit them where it hurts. If we can locate their main base, we might be able to cut them off before they can launch another offensive. We have a problem, Captain, Varn interjected, his voice urgent. Our scans have picked up something strange. There's a massive fleet gathering at the edge of the system, moving toward us at full speed. Are they the same enemy? Lyra asked, her pulse quickening. It's hard to tell, Varn replied. But they're using technology that matches the ones we've already encountered. Jacob's eyes narrowed. They're organizing. If we don't do something now, they'll overrun us before we even have a chance to fight back. Lyra took a deep breath, steadying herself. There was no more room for hesitation. They had to act, and they had to act fast. Get us to the edge of the system, now. We'll face them head-on. The crew sprang into action, the Phoenix powering up as it set course toward the approaching fleet. Lyra stood at the helm, her mind racing as she considered their options. The enemy was strong, stronger than anything they had faced before. But they still had one thing the enemy didn't: the human spirit. As the ship entered the outer reaches of the system, the fleet loomed ahead, a vast wall of enemy ships. Lyra could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on her. This would be no ordinary battle. This would be a fight for survival, a test of everything they had learned so far. The Phoenix dropped out of warp speed, coming face to face with the enemy fleet. Lyra's hands tightened on the controls. She could feel Jacob's gaze on her, the unspoken question hanging between them. Would they make it through this? The first shots rang out, and the battle was on. Return fire, Lyra barked, her voice filled with authority. All ships target their lead vessels. The Phoenix's weapons flared to life, launching powerful beams of energy toward the enemy fleet. The enemy retaliated, sending a volley of missiles toward the ship. Lyra's crew worked quickly, evading the incoming projectiles while returning fire with deadly accuracy. Every second was a blur of movement, a deadly dance between two forces fighting for dominance. Jacob's voice came over the comms. We've got more ships incoming, Captain. They're trying to overwhelm us. We won't let them, Lyra said, her voice unwavering. Hold your ground. The enemy ships began to close in, their weapons firing in synchronized bursts. Lyra watched as one of their ships came into view, a massive vessel, far larger than anything she had seen before. It was heavily armored and bristling with weapons. This, she knew, was the heart of the enemy's fleet. If they could take it down, they might have a chance of winning the battle. Focus all fire on that flagship, Lyra ordered. The Phoenix's weapons locked onto the enemy flagship, launching a barrage of concentrated firepower. The flagship's shields flickered, but it didn't go down. The battle was far from over. Lyra gritted her teeth. Keep firing. Don't let up. As the fight raged on, Lyra could feel the strain on her crew. They were all giving everything they had, but the enemy was relentless. The outcome of this battle remained uncertain. But one thing was clear. Lyra and Jacob weren't going to give up without a fight. The battle raged on around them. An endless swirl of flashing lights, loud explosions, and a constant hum of energy weapons colliding with shields. Lyra's hands were steady on the controls, guiding the Phoenix through the chaos. She could feel the strain in every decision, every move. The enemy wasn't letting up, and with each passing second, it became clearer this wasn't just a battle. This was a test of endurance. Captain, we've lost 2 more ships from our flank. Varn's voice crackled through the comm. We're taking heavy fire from their smaller vessels. They're too fast for our defenses. Lyra's jaw tightened. She had anticipated that the enemy might overwhelm them with numbers, but the sheer intensity of the attack was still overwhelming. Hold them off. We need to keep them distracted until we can take down that flagship. As she spoke, the Phoenix dodged a barrage of missiles that streaked past, narrowly missing them. The enemy fleet was closing in, encircling the ship like a pack of wolves. It wasn't just their weapons they had to worry about. It was the strategy behind them. Every movement seemed deliberate, as if the enemy was learning from every second of the fight. Jacob's voice came over the comm, urgent and sharp. Captain, the enemy flagship is shifting its position. They're going to try and flank us from the left. We need to move. Lyra didn't need to be told twice. All hands, brace for evasive maneuvers. Bring us around to the right. The Phoenix banked hard, avoiding a direct hit from the flagship's main cannon. Lyra's heart raced as the ship swerved and dodged, narrowly escaping another volley of fire. The ship's shields flared with each hit, but they were holding. Barely. They couldn't sustain much more of this. Captain, we're almost in range to hit the flagship's weak point. Jacob's voice came through again. If we hit their engines, we might be able to cripple their fleet. Lyra's eyes darted to the holographic display. The enemy flagship loomed large, its powerful guns aimed directly at them. It was heavily armored, but there was a small opening, just behind the engines. If they could hit that spot, it would cause massive damage and disrupt the flagship's ability to maneuver. She gave the order. Focus all fire on that weak point. Every shot counts. The crew worked in perfect sync, firing their weapons with precision. The Phoenix's energy beams slammed into the enemy flagship, hitting the vulnerable spot just beneath its engines. The ship shuddered, and for a moment, it seemed like the enemy flagship would go down. But then, the flagship retaliated. A massive energy pulse erupted from its core, a shockwave that sent ripples through space. The Phoenix shook violently as the blast rocked the ship. Damage report. Lyra barked. Varn's voice came through, grim. Shields at 40%. Weapons are offline. We've lost power to several systems. It's not looking good, Captain. Lyra's mind raced, but she kept her voice steady. We've come too far to back down now. Get the weapons back online. We'll keep fighting. As the crew scrambled to restore power, Lyra turned to the tactical display, watching as the enemy fleet closed in. They were down, but not out, and neither would they be. Jacob's voice echoed once again. We've got one chance, Captain. That flagship's engines are failing. If we hit it one more time, we can destroy it. Lyra nodded. Prepare for a final assault. All weapons on standby. The Phoenix was battered and bruised, but its crew wasn't giving up. Lyra could feel the tension in her chest, the overwhelming pressure of the moment. They had to make this count. We're in position, Varn called out. Ready to fire. Fire now. Lyra commanded. Energy beams erupted from the Phoenix's cannons, racing toward the flagship. It felt like time slowed as the blasts hit their target. The engines of the enemy flagship sputtered, sparks flying in all directions. And then, with a deafening explosion, the flagship's engines erupted in a massive fireball. The shockwave sent a ripple through the fleet, causing chaos among the enemy ranks. Several of their ships staggered, losing control as their coordination faltered. Jacob's voice was full of relief and triumph. "It's down. The flagship is gone." But the battle wasn't over. The remaining enemy vessels, though disoriented, quickly regrouped, continuing to press the attack. They were formidable, but now their command structure was in ruins. "We need to finish this," Lyra said, determination in her eyes. "Everyone, focus fire on the remaining ships. Take them down." The Phoenix fired again, this time with a renewed sense of purpose. Their shots were more accurate, their movements more deliberate. One by one, the remaining enemy ships began to fall, their shields crumpling under the relentless assault. Finally, after what felt like hours of intense combat, the last enemy vessel exploded in a brilliant flash of light. The crew of the Phoenix let out a collective sigh of relief. The battle was won, but the cost had been high. The ship was heavily damaged, and many of the crew members were exhausted, but they had held their ground. "We did it," Jacob said quietly, his voice full of exhaustion but pride. Lyra turned to him, her face tired but resolute. "We did. But this is only one victory in a much bigger war. There's more to come, and we will face it together." As the Phoenix slowly made its way back to base, Lyra couldn't help but think of the future. The war wasn't over, but today they had proven something. They had shown that no matter the odds, no matter the strength of their enemies, they would not back down. And that, Lyra thought, was the greatest weapon they had. The Phoenix limped back toward the base, its hull scorched and battered from the fierce battle. The crew, though exhausted, had won. The enemy fleet was in ruins, their flagship destroyed. But the victory felt bittersweet. They had survived this fight, but Lyra knew it wasn't the end of the war. As the ship landed in the hangar, the crew disembarked, greeted by the steady hum of the station. The lights were flickering slightly, but the base was intact. Lyra couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. No matter how difficult the fight had been, they had pushed forward and conquered. They had survived. Jacob, still covered in the dust and grime of battle, walked up beside her. "That was too close. I thought we weren't going to make it a few times there." Lyra smiled faintly, her exhaustion weighing on her. "We came close, but we did make it." She glanced around at the crew, each of them worn out but standing tall, having survived one of the most dangerous battles they'd ever faced. They were a team, and that made all the difference. "What now?" Jacob asked, his eyes meeting hers. "We regroup," Lyra said, her voice firm. "We've taken down one part of their forces, but there's still more. We need to prepare for what's coming next." The truth was, they hadn't uncovered all of the enemy's plans. The weapons they'd destroyed were only a fraction of what lay ahead. But that didn't mean they would stop. Lyra knew her crew was strong enough to face whatever came next. A small group of engineers and medical officers quickly approached the Phoenix, ready to assess the damage and tend to the wounded. Lyra and Jacob stepped aside to allow them to work, their eyes meeting in silent understanding. The war was far from over, but today they had taken a huge step forward. Varn, the communications officer, approached Lyra with a datapad in hand. "Captain, we've intercepted more of their transmissions. They're regrouping, but they're not expecting us to hit them again so soon. If we strike now, we may catch them off guard." Lyra thought for a moment, weighing their options. The enemy might be disoriented, but they had to act fast before they could rebuild their forces. "Prepare the fleet," she said at last. "We're going to take the fight to them. Let's finish what we started." Jacob nodded, his face grim but determined. "I'm with you. We've come this far together." Lyra turned to her crew, rallying them for what would be their next move. They had taken down one enemy fleet, but there were many more to go. The fight wasn't over yet, but Lyra knew one thing: they had proven their strength, their resilience. They had faced impossible odds and won. They could do it again. As the crew prepared for the next mission, Lyra found herself standing at the edge of the hangar, staring out into the vast expanse of space. The stars glittered beyond the station's walls, a reminder of the vast unknown that lay ahead. She took a deep breath, letting the silence of the moment wash over her. It had been a long and difficult road, but they had made it. And with each victory, they grew stronger. "Ready for the next fight, Captain?" Jacob's voice broke through her thoughts. Lyra turned, meeting his gaze with a determined smile. Always. The war wasn't over, but they were ready. No matter how powerful their enemies were, no matter how many battles lay ahead, Lyra knew they would face them head-on. They had survived this long, and that was no accident. Together, they would keep fighting until the war was won. And in the end, it wasn't just about the battles they fought. It was about the strength of the human spirit, the unshakable belief that they could overcome anything. As the Phoenix prepared to launch once more, Lyra felt a renewed sense of purpose. She wasn't just fighting for survival anymore. She was fighting for a future where humanity's determination and courage would shine brighter than any enemy. The war was far from over, but they were ready, and that was enough to make Lyra believe they could win.